Harper Vance had exactly 4 seconds to decide whether to let the old woman's insult land or to swallow it whole, and she chose, as she always chose, to smile instead. The dining room at Belmere, the kind of restaurant where the tablecloths cost more than her rent, and the wine list read like a dead language, had gone quiet the moment the elderly Korean woman at table 12 pushed her plate away and announced, loudly enough for 3 tables to hear, that the salmon tasted like something scraped off a dock. Harper set down the water pitcher she was carrying and crossed the floor before her manager could, because she had learned in 2 years of waiting tables that a crisis handled fast was a crisis half solved. "I am so sorry it isn't right," Harper said, crouching slightly, so she was eye level with the woman instead of looming over her, a habit she had built without ever being taught it, some instinct that told her old women hated being talked down to more than almost anything else. "Let me bring you something else on the house, and you tell me exactly what would make it better." The old woman, whose name Harper did not yet know was Soonja Cho, looked up at her with an expression that had flattened 3 servers into apologetic silence already that afternoon, and found, instead of the usual nervous deference, a young woman who was not afraid of her at all. "You think a new plate fixes rudeness," Soonja said, her English precise and clipped, honed by decades in this country into something sharper than a blade. "I think a new plate fixes lunch," Harper said, "and I think you're allowed to be as particular as you want, because you're the one paying for it and the kitchen should have gotten it right the first time." Something shifted behind the old woman's eyes, some small and grudging recalculation, and she did not smile, because Harper would learn over the following weeks that Soonja Cho did not smile easily for anyone, but she stopped glaring, and that was, Harper would come to understand, its own kind of victory. Across the table, silent until now, sat the son who had brought her, a man in a charcoal suit so precisely tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin, his hands folded loosely on the white cloth in a stillness that Harper's instincts, honed by 2 years of reading difficult tables, immediately flagged as unusual. Most men fidgeted. This one did not. His name, though Harper would not learn it for another several minutes, was Jaewon Cho, and he watched the exchange between his mother and the waitress with the focused attention of a man who did not often see anything worth watching. "You will bring her the branzino instead," Jaewon said, and it was not a suggestion, though his voice carried none of the sharpness his mother's had, only a low, even certainty that made Harper's skin prickle in a way she chose not to examine too closely. "And bring my mother tea, the kind without the bitterness. She will tell you which one." Soonja made a small, disapproving sound at being spoken for, but did not correct him, and Harper caught, in the half-second before she turned toward the kitchen, the ghost of something almost fond passing between mother and son, buried under decades of formality neither of them seemed inclined to shed in public. She returned 12 minutes later with the branzino plated exactly as Soonja liked, having asked the sommelier, an older man named Desmond who had worked at Belmere longer than Harper had been alive, what an elderly Korean woman with exacting standards might actually want from her tea, and the answer, when she set it down, drew the first genuine reaction Harper had gotten out of the older woman all afternoon. "You asked someone," Soonja said, studying the tea rather than the fish. "I didn't want to guess and get it wrong twice," Harper said. Soonja looked up at her again, longer this time, and something in her face had gone from assessing to something closer to curious, though she said nothing further, only lifted the tea and drank, and nodded once, which Harper understood, without needing to be told, was as close to praise as the woman handed out. Belmere on a Thursday afternoon ran on a particular rhythm Harper had learned by heart over 2 years, the lull between the lunch crowd's arrival and its eventual thinning, and she used the brief calm to check on table 12 twice more before dessert, refilling Soonja's tea without being asked and earning, on the second pass, a small approving grunt that Harper decided to count as progress. She had grown up watching her own grandmother demand exacting standards from everyone around her and receive, in return, mostly rolled eyes and reluctant compliance, and something in Soonja's particular brand of difficulty felt familiar to Harper in a way she did not examine too closely at the time, a kind of prickliness that masked, she suspected, a person who had simply stopped expecting the world to meet her halfway. When the dessert course arrived, a modest architecture of chocolate and gold leaf that the pastry chef took unreasonable pride in. Soonja studied it for a long moment before saying, without looking up, that it reminded her of desserts from a bakery near her childhood home that had closed decades ago, and Harper, sensing an opening most servers would have let pass, asked what the bakery had been called. Soonja told her, briefly, and then seemed almost startled at herself for having volunteered it, glancing at her son as though checking whether he had noticed his mother offer a stranger something resembling a memory. Jae-won had noticed. He noticed everything, and Jae-won did not look away from Harper for the rest of the meal, though he was careful, in the way of a man accustomed to controlling every visible signal his body gave off, not to let his attention become obvious to anyone but her. He noticed the way she moved between tables without ever seeming rushed, the way she remembered, 3 courses later, that the man at table 9 had asked for his water without ice and corrected it without being reminded, the way she had not once, in the 40 minutes since the salmon incident, treated his mother's difficulty as a burden rather than simply a fact to be managed. He was a man who ran an organization that controlled 6 blocks of the harbor district and every shipment that moved through it without his knowledge or blessing, a man whose name alone emptied rooms in 3 different neighborhoods, and he found himself, absurdly, unable to stop watching a waitress refill water glasses. When the check came, he added an amount to the tip that made Harper's manager pull her aside afterward with wide eyes and ask what exactly she had done to earn it, and Harper, who did not yet understand what she had walked into, only shrugged and said she had been kind to someone who was having a hard day, because that was, as far as she knew, the whole of it. It would be 4 more days before she learned otherwise, for days in which the restaurant's rhythms continued as they always did, the lunch rush and the dinner rush and the long, slow evenings of side work, and she thought of the strange, still man in the charcoal suit only occasionally, the way you think of an unusual weather event, memorable but unlikely to recur. She was wrong about that, though she would not know it until the following Tuesday, when Soonja Cho returned to Belmere alone, without her son, and requested, by name, to be seated in Harper's section, and Harper, arriving at the table with a water pitcher and a professional smile, found the old woman studying her with an expression far more direct than anything she had shown 4 days before. "Sit," Soonja said, gesturing at the empty chair across from her, and when Harper hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen where her manager stood in clear view, the old woman made an impatient sound and said, "I have already spoken to the man who runs this restaurant. He says you may sit as long as I require you." Harper sat, because refusing a woman like Soonja Cho seemed, even after only one previous encounter, like an unwise use of anyone's energy. "You are wondering why I am here," Soonja said, not a question. "A little," Harper admitted. "My son does not bring women home," Soonja said, with a flat delivery of a woman stating a fact rather than confiding a secret, "and he has spoken of nothing else since Thursday but a waitress who is not afraid of me." Harper felt heat climb into her face despite herself, and covered it by pouring water she did not need to pour. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone," she said. "I know," Soonja said. "That is precisely the problem from where I am sitting." She studied Harper for a long moment, the kind of appraisal Harper imagined a jeweler might give a stone whose value was not yet determined, and then said, with no more ceremony than she had used to complain about the salmon, "My son is not a simple man. You should know this before it goes any further, because I will not have you walking into something blind and then blaming my family when the walls turn out to be higher than you expected." "What does he do?" Harper asked, though something in her chest had already begun to suspect the answer would not be a comfortable one. Soonja's mouth thinned. "He runs things," she said. "Many things. Things that make men afraid to say his name in the wrong room. I am telling you this because I watched you not be afraid of an old woman with a sharp tongue, and I wonder if you understand that being unafraid of my son would be a far more dangerous mistake." "Are you trying to scare me off?" Harper asked, because it seemed, despite everything, like the honest question to ask. "I am trying to be fair to you," Soonja said, and for the first time since Harper had met her, something in the old woman's voice softened into something almost weary. "Do you know what it is to watch your only son build a life out of concrete and steel because he believes softness will get him killed? I raised him gentle once. The world took that away from him piece by piece, and I stood by and let it happen because I did not know how to stop it. I do not wish that on anyone foolish enough to love him." Harper set the water pitcher down fully now, giving the older woman her complete attention. "That's not a warning," she said slowly. "That's a mother worried about her son." Soonja's eyes flickered, caught, and she recovered with the brisk irritation of a woman unused to being read so plainly. "Do not mistake concern for permission," she said. "I have given you information. What you do with it is your own foolishness to own." The warning sat between them, plain and unadorned beneath its gruffness, and Harper understood, with the particular clarity that comes from being told something true by someone who has no reason to lie, that she had just been handed the first honest account of Jae-won Cho that anyone was likely to give her, wrapped inside the first honest account of his mother as well. The confirmation came 2 nights later, in a way Harper would spend a long time afterward wishing she could unsee. She was closing out her section, the dining room emptied to its last stragglers, when the sound of the restaurant's front door opening wrong, too fast, too hard, sent a jolt through her before she had even turned to look. 2 men she did not recognize came through first, and behind them a third who moved like the room already belonged to him, though his face was wrong for the calm his posture suggested, tight and urgent in a way that made every server on the floor go still. It took Harper a moment to place who they were looking for, and by the time she did, Jae-won Cho was already standing from a corner table she had not noticed him occupying, his own posture shifting from stillness into something coiled and ready in the space of a single breath. "You should not have come here," Jae-won said, low and even, and the lead man's mouth curled into something that was not quite a smile. "Your mother eats lunch here twice a week," the man said. "Predictable men die predictable deaths, Cho. I thought I would save everyone the trouble." What happened next took perhaps 11 seconds, though Harper would replay it in memory for far longer than that. Jae-won moving with an economy of motion that had nothing hesitant in it, disarming the nearest man with a movement so precise it looked almost gentle before it clearly was not, and in the chaos of overturned chairs and shouting, Harper understood 2 things with sudden and total clarity: that the man in front of her was exactly as dangerous as his mother had warned, and that the danger had just walked directly into the restaurant where she worked because of him. She should have run. Every instinct trained by 22 years of ordinary life told her to run, to get behind the kitchen doors and let the professionals, whoever they turned out to be, handle whatever this was. Instead, when the third man broke off from the struggle and lunged toward the exit Jae-won had not yet covered, straight toward the section of the dining room where an elderly couple sat frozen mid-meal, Harper grabbed the heavy iron stand that held the dessert cart and swung it into the man's path with everything her arms had in them, sending him sprawling hard enough into an empty table that he did not get up in time to matter. Jae-won's head snapped toward her, something raw and unguarded moving across his face for the first time since she had met him, and in the silence that followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of men on the floor and the distant wail of a siren finally arriving, he said her name, Harper, in a way that made it sound like something he had not expected to need. The aftermath took most of the night to untangle, the restaurant closed and cordoned, statements given to men who arrived without uniforms but with the particular authority of people used to being obeyed, and Harper sat in the manager's office wrapped in a coat someone had given her, hands shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go, when Jae-won found her there. He did not sit. He stood in the doorway with his jacket torn at one shoulder and a shallow cut along his jaw that he made no move to acknowledge, and for a long moment he only looked at her, as though recalibrating something he had believed settled. "You could have run," he said finally. "I could have," Harper agreed. "You did not." "No. Why?" The question sat heavier than its single syllable suggested, and Harper found she did not have a rehearsed answer for it, only the truth, which felt more dangerous to hand him than anything else she owned. "Because that man was about to hurt people who had nothing to do with whatever this is between you and whoever sent him," she said. "And because I don't think I could have lived with watching it happen and doing nothing." Jae-won was quiet for a moment, studying her the way he had studied her 4 days earlier over a ruined plate of salmon, as though recalculating, once again, something he had believed already settled about the shape of the world. Most people freeze, he said. The ones who do not freeze usually run. I have met very few who do neither. Maybe I just didn't have time to pick the smart option, Harper said, and he almost smiled at that, the corner of his mouth moving in a way that looked unfamiliar on his face, as though the muscles required for it saw little use. My mother told you what I am, he said. It was not quite a question. She told me you run things, Harper said. She didn't use the word mafia, if that's what you're asking. She didn't have to. And you came to the restaurant anyway, knowing that. I came to the restaurant because it's my job, Harper said. The rest of it I found out tonight. Same as you found out I apparently swing dessert carts like a weapon when the situation calls for it. Jae-won crossed the small room and crouched in front of her chair, the way she had once crouched in front of his mother, so that they were eye level, and studied her face with an intensity that made her pulse climb despite the exhaustion dragging at every part of her. The man who came here tonight works for a family that has wanted my territory for 3 years, he said. He will not be the last one they send. And now that they have seen your face, seen that you were the one who stopped tonight from becoming worse, you are no longer someone they will overlook. I need you to understand what that means before I say anything else to you. Then tell me what it means, Harper said, and did not look away. What it meant, over the following 2 weeks, was a version of her life she would never have chosen, and could not now imagine giving back. Jae-won installed 2 of his people outside Belmere without asking her permission, a decision she argued about exactly once before understanding, from the flat immovability in his voice, that this was not a negotiation. I didn't sign up to have bodyguards, Harper told him on the second morning, finding one of the men, a broad, quiet figure named Young-ho, standing near the restaurant's service entrance with the patient stillness of someone who expected to be there a long time. You did not sign up for any of it, Jae-won said. That is precisely the problem. None of this was a choice you made, only a consequence you inherited, and I intend to make certain the consequence does not cost you your life, while I sort out who sent it. That's not really an answer. It is the only one I have, he said, and something in the plainness of it disarmed the rest of her argument more thoroughly than any smoother explanation could have. She learned, over those 2 weeks, small, unexpected things about the life she had stepped into, that Young-ho preferred his coffee black and never spoke unless spoken to first, that Jae-won's office occupied the top floor of a shipping company that functioned, as far as Harper could tell, as both a legitimate business and something considerably less legitimate underneath it, that the calm precision he carried into every room was not performance, but simply the only gear he had ever learned to operate in. She learned, too, that he listened when she talked about her own life, her mother back in Georgia, who called every Sunday, the nursing program she had deferred twice to keep working double shifts, the particular satisfaction of a dining room running exactly right on a busy Friday night, and that he asked follow-up questions the way a man does when he is genuinely trying to understand a language he was never taught. He came to the restaurant most evenings now, not to eat but to walk her the 4 blocks to her apartment, a habit that started as pure necessity and became, somewhere in the second week, something neither of them named but both of them arranged their evenings around. On the 4th night of this new routine, rain came down hard enough to flood the gutters, and Jae-won, who Harper had never once seen without an umbrella or a car waiting, simply took off his suit jacket and held it over both their heads without asking whether she wanted it there, walking close enough that his shoulder brushed hers with every other step. You'll ruin the jacket, Harper said, watching the fine wool darken with water. It is a jacket, he said, as though the concept of an object mattering more than a person standing beside him was faintly absurd to him, and Harper found herself laughing despite the cold, despite the 2 men trailing a discreet distance behind them, despite everything about the situation that should have felt anything but ordinary. They reached her building's awning soaked through anyway, the jacket having done little against the volume of rain, and stood there a moment longer than the moment required, water dripping from both of them onto the concrete, neither making the first move toward the door. You don't have to do this every night, Harper said, though some part of her hoped he would disagree. I know, Jae-won said. I am not doing it because I have to. He said it simply, without any of the practiced weight a smoother man might have given the line, and Harper understood that this was, for him, its own kind of confession, offered sideways because he did not yet know how to offer anything directly. She reached up without entirely deciding to, and pushed a strand of wet hair back from his forehead, an ordinary, unthinking gesture she might have made for anyone, and felt him go very still beneath her hand, the stillness of a man unused to being touched without calculation behind it. "Good night, Jaewon," she said softly, and went inside before either of them could turn the moment into something neither was ready for yet, though she stood just inside the door for a long minute afterward, listening to the rain, feeling her own pulse settle slowly back to something ordinary. Soonja, when Harper next saw her, studied her for a long moment across the same table where she had once delivered her warning, and said only, "You did not run," in a tone that carried more weight than any compliment the old woman had ever paid anyone, and Harper understood that whatever test this had been, she had passed it in a way words could not have accomplished. The wound Jaewon carried, when he finally spoke of it, came on a night when they sat on the narrow balcony of her apartment with the city humming below them, and he told her, in the plain, unadorned language of a man unused to explaining himself, about a woman years before, someone he had loved before the empire had finished shaping him, who had died because a rival organization believed hurting her would break something in him worth exploiting. "It worked," he said quietly. "It broke exactly the thing they wanted broken. I decided afterward that I would never again let anyone close enough to be used against me that way." "And now," Harper said. "Now you are standing in my apartment anyway," he said, "which tells you either that I have learned nothing, or that I could not help it." Harper reached over and laced her fingers through his, feeling the calluses on his palm that no tailored suit could disguise, and said, "Maybe it just means you found someone worth the risk this time." He did not answer with words, only turned his hand to hold hers properly, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was the particular kind of silence that exists between two people who have just admitted something neither of them can take back. The rival family, a faction run by a man named Duncan Reyes who had spent 3 years probing at the edges of Jaewon's territory looking for exactly the kind of weakness a woman like Harper represented, made their real move on a Friday night that began, deceptively, like any other. Harper had just finished her shift when the 2 guards stationed outside Belmere went quiet on their radios at the same moment, and by the time she understood something was wrong, a car had already pulled to the curb, and a man she did not recognize was walking toward her with a loose, confident gait of someone who believed the outcome of the next several minutes was already decided. She did not scream, and she did not freeze, because 2 weeks of watching Jaewon move through danger like a language he had been born speaking had taught her something about the value of decisive action over panic. She threw the heavy ring of restaurant keys directly at the man's face, hard enough to make him flinch and lose half a step, and used that half-second to bolt back through Belmere's front doors and slam the heavy iron bolt Desmond had installed years ago for reasons that had never mattered until tonight. Her phone was already in her hand, already dialing the number Jaewon had made her memorize instead of save, and his voice on the other end, when he answered, carried none of its usual stillness. "Where are you?" he said, and she told him, and she heard, in the background, the sound of a car engine already roaring to life before she had finished the sentence. He arrived in under 4 minutes, which Harper would later learn was itself a kind of miracle given the distance, and what followed in the alley beside Belmere was not the choreographed precision of the restaurant confrontation but something rawer, angrier. A man who had spent 2 weeks controlling every visible signal of what she meant to him finally letting all of it show at once. Duncan Reyes himself had come this time, unwilling any longer to trust the job to subordinates who kept failing, and when Jaewon found him standing over the man Harper had felled with her improvised keys, something in Jaewon's face went past cold into something Harper had not yet seen and hoped never to see turn toward her. "You should have stayed away from what is mine," Jaewon said, and Reyes, still confident despite the numbers no longer favoring him, said, "She's the reason you're finally showing cracks, Cho. Kill her, and this all gets easier for both of us." It was Harper, not Jaewon, who ended the standoff, stepping out from the doorway she had been told to stay behind, and hurling a fire extinguisher she had grabbed from the kitchen's emergency mount directly into Reyes's exposed side, the impact staggering him enough for Jaewon to close the remaining distance and finish what his rival's arrogance had started. When it was over, Reyes restrained and the alley filled with Jaewon's people arriving in the wake of the confrontation rather than ahead of it. Jaewon turned to Harper with something in his expression that had nothing calculated left in it at all. "You are supposed to stay hidden," he said, and Harper, breathing hard, said, "I don't do hidden well, apparently," and watched something that was almost a laugh move across his face before he crossed the distance between them and kissed her the way a man kisses someone he had genuinely believed, moments before, he might lose. The weeks that followed dismantled what remained of Reyes's operation with the methodical thoroughness Jaewon brought to everything he did, though Harper, true to the promise she had made herself, never asked for the details, and he never offered them unprompted, an understanding that settled between them without needing to be spoken aloud. She noticed, instead, the smaller signs of a war ending rather than the war itself, Young-ho relaxing by degrees outside Belmir's service entrance until one afternoon he was simply not there anymore, having been reassigned to duties that no longer required guarding a waitress from a threat that no longer existed, and Jaewon's shoulders, which she had not fully realized carried a permanent tension until she watched it finally loosen over a quiet dinner in his apartment, both of them still slightly too aware of how close the alley beside Belmir had come to ending differently. He did not tell her Reyes's fate in words, but she understood, from the particular quality of silence that settled over the harbor district in the weeks after, that the threat had been resolved in whatever manner men in Jaewon's world resolved such things permanently, and she made her peace with not needing the details, because some parts of the life she had chosen were his to carry alone. What she did ask about, on a quiet evening 3 months later, when Soonja had insisted on cooking dinner for both of them in a kitchen Harper was only beginning to feel welcome in, was whether Jaewon had ever imagined his life turning out this way, tangled up with a waitress who had once refused to be afraid of his mother. "No," he admitted, watching Soonja move between the stove and the table with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had cooked for exactly one difficult man for most of her life and was now, grudgingly, cooking for two. "I imagined something colder, something safer, or what I told myself was safer. And now," Harper said. "Now I have a mother who likes you more than she has ever liked anyone I have brought near her," he said, "and I have learned that safety was never actually the thing I wanted, only the thing I settled for because I believed I could not have both survival and something worth surviving for." Soonja, setting a dish down between them with more force than strictly necessary, said without looking up, "He talks too much when he is happy. He did not used to talk at all." Harper laughed, and Jaewon's hand found hers beneath the table, and outside the window the harbor district he ruled went on with its ordinary Friday night noise, indifferent to the fact that somewhere within it, a man who had sworn never again to let anyone close enough to be used against him had decided, deliberately and with open eyes, that some risks were worth every danger they carried. Later that night, after Soonja had gone home and the dishes had been cleared, Harper stood on the balcony where Jaewon had once told her about the woman he had lost, and found him already there, watching the same skyline he had been watching the night everything between them had finally been said aloud without pretense. "Regrets?" he asked, not quite a question, the way he asked most things that mattered to him. "None," Harper said. "You." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer at all, and then he said, "I regret every year I spent believing I could not have this. I do not regret a single day since the one you refused to let my mother's rudeness go unanswered." He turned to face her fully then, the city lights catching the sharp line of his jaw, the small healed scar along it a reminder of the night everything had truly begun. "I built an empire out of the belief that nothing could touch me if I let nothing in," he said. "You touched me anyway. I am still deciding whether to resent you for it or thank you, some days both in the same hour." Harper laughed softly at that, leaning into the solid warmth of him, and thought that if someone had told her, the day she talked back gently to a difficult old woman over an overcooked piece of salmon, that it would lead her here, to a rooftop above a harbor ruled by the quiet man beside her, she would not have believed a single word of it, and yet here she stood now, choosing it again, freely, with clear eyes and no illusions left to lose. Choosing him, choosing the whole complicated weight of it with her eyes fully open, and that the choosing itself, made freely and without illusion, was worth more to her than any easier, safer life she might have kept instead.